come to you first there, Isaac Mathai, since you met the family personally and King Charles. You want to tell us about how the royal family is seeing all that has happened in the last 2 weeks?
It was very nice to meet with King Charles and the Queen consort. It was in her residence I went and met with them because as a physician, I am looking after some portion of holistic consultation with them for the last several years. So it was nice, but I surprisingly even became king. There is no change at all in their behavior or approach towards you. They are as usual, very courteous and very nice and very polite. And I congratulated as well as convey my condolences of me and our family and Saukya and Bangalore, Karnataka, all that to them. And they always have very fond memories of India, and they love India. Both of them love India, and they won't lose any opportunity to visit India anytime.
You know, I just want to tell our viewers, holistic healing is what Dr. Mathai does, and King Charles has come to Saukya a couple of times, am I correct?
The Queen Camilla, she had been to Saukya 8 times in 10 years, and King Charles came one time because of security and so many reasons. It's not that easy for him to come and spend a week in a public place like that. But he was come, and then I'm consulting on a regular basis.
Very interesting, an angle that many people perhaps don't know, that Queen Camilla and King Charles have been coming to Saukya in Bengaluru. But Farooq Dhondi, author, columnist, are we making too much of the monarchy? Does it have any relevance, particularly to the Commonwealth, to us here in India? All this spectacle that we've seen through the day, how should we see it? As nostalgia rather than see it as any real relevance to the world today?
Well, first of all, you ought to understand that there isn't a monarchy in Britain. There is royal family and there is royalty. Ever since Oliver Cromwell chopped off Charles I's head, the monarchy has lost its power to do anything significant. And even through Victoria's reign, we saw a complete disappearance of the power of the monarch, or of the queen, the titular head of the empire. Even though she called herself the empress, the real power, for instance, in India, was in the hands of the viceroy and the council in Calcutta and then in Delhi, and not in the hands of Victoria at all. She couldn't even nominate her own servant as a knight when she, Abdul Karim, when she wanted to. They didn't allow her to do that. So what we're seeing today is a tribal expression of a loyalty to continuity of the British nation. And that's about it. When you say the Queen is dead, long live the King, God save King Charles III, what you're seeing is a symbolic continuity in Britain's feeling about itself, in Britain's nationalism. As far as its relevance to the Commonwealth is concerned, there is absolutely none. Of course, delegates from all over the Commonwealth and delegates from America and President Macron and President Biden, they all turned up to the funeral to show their respects for a significant, great country. But as far as the monarchy is concerned, as far as royalty is concerned, they have no connection with these countries. They can do symbolic things like, cut ribbons at dog shows, or go to the horse races, or whatever they do as symbolic heads. They have absolutely no power and no significance for the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth might be significant in Liz Truss's prime ministership, because after Brexit, Britain is looking for partners in trade all over the place, because it has really suffered from leaving the European Union, as far as trade and imports and exports are concerned. So they will press, the government will press the Commonwealth, and they might use Charles to say, make a state visit to India or a state visit to Pakistan or to Barbados or wherever, so that we can cement trade relations. But that will be at the behest of
Right.
the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister.
So you're saying very, very limited powers, purely symbolic in nature, almost a symbolic continuity. Ed Luce, do you agree with that? And what we've seen today is a symbolic continuity, a sense of British nationalism, but beyond that, very little else?
I think that's about right. I mean, you must remember that the tradition of continuity with the British royal family, as I think Farouk was sort of indicating, is one of change and adaptation to changing circumstances. And so it's gone from being an absolute monarchy 400 or 500 years ago to being a purely symbolic monarchy, not quite a monarchy, not quite the bicycling bourgeois monarchies that you see in Scandinavia and the Netherlands that have really downgraded. But I suspect there's going to be a lot of pressure on Charles to downgrade some of the sort of scale of pomp and circumstance around the royal family in what is a time of quite great economic austerity in Britain, and much worse to come, by the way, this winter. So the test of whether, you know, that continuity is going to involve some change, some trimming down, I think will come with Charles's coronation next year. Will it be this grand golden coronation you saw for his mother in 1953, or will it be a more modest Scandinavian style one? And I suspect he has preferences, and he's argued over many decades for slimming down what they call the civil list. That's the number of royals who get money from the taxpayer. He's successfully argued to shrink it, and I suspect he's going to, mindful of history, mindful of the adaptability of the institution he now heads, he's going to want to slim it down some more. As regards the Commonwealth, look, there are 14 countries left with the British monarch on its coins as its head of state. There were probably 50 when the Queen became Queen. That's also part of continuity, that people drop the British monarch as their head of state. It's a totally natural thing to do. I'm surprised there are as many as 14 countries left that still keep the British monarch. And I suspect that rate of decrease will continue quite steadily in the years ahead. It just doesn't seem normal for a country, say, the other side of the world, like Australia, or the other side of the Atlantic, like Canada, or many Caribbean, West Indian nations, to have what is a foreign head of state as your head of state. So, you know, I don't even think that will signal any great disruption. It's a totally normal thing. And if I were Australian or Jamaican or whatever, I would certainly want my own head of state.
But then how do you explain, Ed Luce, this spectacle that we've seen over the last 10 days? This grand...
There's a flower of the...
How do you explain the spectacle, Ed Luce? Because does that suggest an affection for Queen Elizabeth, quite distinct from any special affection for the royalty?
Yes, I think it does. And look, a sort of interesting factoid occurred to me today. When she was born in 1926, so 21 years before India's independence, the world's population was 2 billion. Today, 2.5 billion watched her funeral, more than the number of people alive when she was born, and what is amongst the largest television audiences in history. This reflects, I think, affection for her, for what was a very non-flashy, non-showy, quite in her own way modest person, in spite of the sometimes absurd monarchical trappings around her, that there was an affection. And there's also, you know, we talk about nostalgia, but funerals are about looking back. And 70 years on the throne, beating Queen Victoria, beating all the Georges and all the Charleses and Edwards and all the others who've been on the English throne for 1,000 years, and beating, I think, every single other living head of state or head of nation, other than the Dalai Lama, who of course became the Dalai Lama during the Second World War, is quite an extraordinary feat. And so it marks, it's a punctuation mark in history. There is no empire left. There hasn't been for a very long time. But she was the last monarch who really came to adulthood whilst there was an empire. And so I think this closes the final sort of trappings on that era.
You know, let me have one final question to you, Farooq Dhondy. In India, there's much talk about decolonization. You've seen roads being renamed, roads that were seen to be linked in a way to colonial rule, to the Raj. Do you see that process of decolonization now unstoppable in a way? And does the Raj, in a way, does the royal family have to reach out to India in a way, apologize, let's say, for a Jallianwala Bagh, or make that kind of step which convinces India that the royal family, in a way, is reaching out to the Indian people?
I don't know if the Indian people will ever have the kind of reverence that the British people themselves have for the monarchy. And as far as, you know, changing the names of places is concerned, some names persist because memory persists. For instance, a lot of people still call Chhatrapati Shivaji Station Victoria Terminus. It was always called Victoria Terminus, and sometimes it's still called Boribandar. And so changing the name depends on the memory and the affection that people have for it. Of course, names, history does erode itself because as time goes on, new people come to power and they want to wipe out the bad memories of before. That has happened in the case not only of the empire, but even of Muslim rulers of which the present party doesn't approve. For instance, Aurangzeb Road.
Right.
But I don't think that India should start wiping out its own history in that way. Naming one road from, you know, from Dalhousie Marg to Nehru Marg or whatever is fair enough. But, you know, trying to alter the history of India is unfair to future generations and unfair to the view of what kind of nation we are.
Let me leave it there. Farooq Dhondy, Ed Luce, Mr. Mathai, on this day when the world has come together to mourn Queen Elizabeth II, for, if not for any other reason, the sheer continuity and the stability that she provided her nation and indeed, in a way, the world around her. I appreciate your joining me here on the news today. Thank you very much for joining us on that story. Those are still live pictures that are continuing there from London.